Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. I'm talking to another naming expert today, Scott Milano. He's the founder and managing director of Tanj, a boutique consultancy that specializes in unleashing the power of words in brands. You can find them at tanj.co, that's Tanj.co. Tanj does brand strategy work, messaging and voice, taglines, and copywriting, and of course they do naming, which is what we're going to focus on today. Scott's worked on some big brand names like Nintendo Wii, Ally Bank, Sony Bravia, and Filmstruck, among many others. Talking to Scott, I got the impression a hallmark of his approach to naming is that it's complete, exhaustive, that it leaves no stone unturned. And I wanted to get a sense of how he and his team at Tanj do that, how they go deep on a naming assignment. He shared a few tools and methodologies that I hadn't heard anywhere else, and I hope you find it really useful too. Here's the conversation. Scott, thanks so much for making the time to talk.
Thanks so much for having me, Rob.
You have a couple of naming guides on your site, which I'll also post a link to, but you have one for companies and one for products. Why two separate naming guides?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and it kind of goes to the heart of the difference between naming a product and a company. One, with a product, it's usually a little bit more focused, like products do kind of one thing or maybe a couple things. Companies often tend to do many things, so you're actually trying to name a much bigger target. And in the context of that, we typically think it's a whole other animal. The other side of it, too, is just with companies, I think you come across a number of different issues, or they get blown up and become more important compared to when you're naming a product. Internally, if you're naming or renaming, it can be a very political issue. A lot of people, especially if it's a high-profile naming project, a lot of people are involved. There are a number of different stakeholders, can get pretty thorny on that side. And then just thinking about in terms of trademark classes, a product can be pretty focused and play in like one or two trademark classes. A company might play in multiple ones, so you inherently have just a higher hurdle to overcome.
Leading up to the conversation, I read through the guides, and to be honest, I was shocked at how long and detailed they are. I've seen some naming guides online that some are almost like a one sheet of just kind of the high level how to do naming, but you guys really got into a lot of detail. Can you talk a little more about what motivated you to put that much detail into them and what it was like creating them? How did that go?
In terms of motivation to dive into the details, I think it's actually indicative of how we work. We go deep with our clients and really try extremely hard to uncover all the issues that are going to be relevant in the conversation. This is just on the project side, whereas other firms or other individuals just might not do that. And I think for us to put together these guides, we wanted to come to the table with something substantial that spoke to who we are and how we think as a business at Tanj, how I personally approach naming and my team approaches it. So we wanted to put some rigor into it and make sure that we tell a cohesive story that's real and representative of the challenges our clients are facing.
Now that the guides are available online, how's the response been? How are your clients and prospects reacting?
Yeah, the response has been good. So we've had them out there for about 2 years now. On our site, it's one of the most downloaded pages. Clients regularly reference, how informative they are. And we even get these like sort of regular random emails from folks who would probably never become clients for us, but they just wanted to say thanks and they appreciate the time and thought that went into it.
Your website talks about name generation as where the magic happens. As we all know, it's part magic, but also part science. Is there a process or specific steps that you follow consistently when you're doing naming at Tanj?
Yeah, of course. I think certainly the naming portion of it is where the magic happens, but it's not going to happen if you don't do your homework and really lay out some key fundamental aspects of a strategy, just sort of understanding overall landscape, really diving deep into it. So essentially our process in a very quick nutshell is to kick off with a client and understand the ins and outs of their entire business, whether it's a product or a business, and all sorts of all the ancillary stuff that comes with that. We pull all that information into our world, the world of naming, obviously, of message and brand at large, and we do a bit of a discovery, distill everything down into a definitive naming strategy, which is a blueprint, right, for how we see them, or where we see the most opportunity for naming the new brand. And then based on that, even before we create a single name, we do like to do our homework and make sure we've got the right direction teed up. And then from there, we start name generation, where we're going into all sorts of angles and avenues, approaching the strategy from all different sides.
Can you tell me about, when you sit down with the brief, what kind of timing or pace you use to make sure that you're really optimizing the name generation phase?
I'm a morning guy. I wake up quite early and find I'm most productive in terms of creative work early in the morning. So that's anywhere from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And I usually do, when I really get into it, when we know we're working and churning on something pretty hard, I'll do kind of one sitting a day for a project, and might couple multiple projects together, but it's really just, making a concerted effort to dive into it and focus for several hours at a time, and just try to approach the brief, approach the strategy from all sides, and then sides that maybe aren't even contained in the brief, just to see what comes out. I typically like to treat the name generation portion in particular as like a series of sprints. Like, you get in there, you go hard, and then you move on to something else, and then you come back the next day and do it all over again.
And I think you said a sprint is a couple of hours at least. Do you feel like there's a minimum amount of time that you need to set aside in order to really have that be a useful sprint?
Great question. Some sprints are faster and more productive than others. So, on the short side, it could be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. I find, just personally, things tend to drag if it goes over 3 hours, and your time and focus is actually better spent sort of shifting gears, stepping out of it for a little bit, and then just, again, personally for me, I like to come back in the next morning and do it all over again. So
during one of these sprints, generally speaking, are you in front of a computer and typing thoughts into a document, or are you more of a pen and pad kind of guy?
100% computer. If you gave me a pen and paper and asked me to name, not much would come of it. And the truth is, this is kind of how I learned doing it, and I feel, my fingers flow, and I just feel thoughts come to me much faster when I'm connected to a computer in particular. We use a lot of spreadsheets for every project. We house all of our creative, all of our names, all of our screening results, shortlisting, any other data that comes out throughout the project in a single spreadsheet, and essentially run the whole project, or run each project off of a spreadsheet. I've worked in other agencies and with other agencies, and I've seen names on paper being floated through Word docs, PowerPoint decks, where the data is useful, but you can't manipulate it and tag it in the way that it really needs to be, kind of organized. And for us, spreadsheets are a great method for that. If you really think about it, like, every name that you create, ultimately, whether it's a good name or a bad name, comes with some decisions, right? It's like, are you going to move it forward through the process? How are you going to move it forward through the process? And there are so many steps that come after generating a name that it's important to just keep your information really organized.
Right.
And that way you can filter through it quickly. You can track everything. If there's issues that arise, you can go back and reference it. So we're 100% sort of spreadsheet and Google Doc driven.
Got it. That gives a little insight into how you work as a team at Tanj. I'm also just wondering, for the name generation, do you generally get together and brainstorm as a group, or is it more everybody is an individual contributor and then you get together to shortlist or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So earlier on in the process, when we're, sort of brainstorming strategies, approaches, we tend to do that as a team. Somebody will take the lead and sort of hammer out ideas after we've talked collectively and kind of gotten inspired. And then we'll continue to go back and forth and refine our strategic approach. When it comes time to name, I think we all tend to work best individually. Everybody kind of likes their own space and gets into it at different times. Naming for us isn't something that, it's not like you can chain somebody to a desk and say, name it. Some firms might work like that, but we just tend to take a slightly more free approach. And I think it just yields different results and it works with our overall work style.
Got it.
When it comes time to shortlist, though, one of the things that we're pretty big on is seeking input from a larger group. So it's not just, say, me, the creative director, making some final decisions about like which names are going to get into the presentation or what are we going to actually share with the client. I think we all value and think it's important to just to highlight the ones that individually we think are cool and are moving in the right direction. So we use a bit of light testing within our team itself, sort of like real-time testing, to see which ones are potentially rising to the top. And then from there, begin to cull the list down and package up options to share with a client.
So that's interesting. On the shortlisting, I want to make sure I understood what you just said. Do you purposely bring people into shortlisting that have not been on doing name generation?
Yeah, so in some cases we do, actually. It's not for every project. When we're under a serious time crunch, you just can't. Sometimes you just don't have the time to actually seek a ton of outside input. But when we're working on projects that we know that, say, the target audience has a very different perspective, we'll pull from our network of folks, whether they're pure brand people or artists or creatives or whatever, to provide some input on the names that we're creating.
Today's episode is brought to you by Audible. For listeners of How Brands Are Built, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's audibletrial.com/HBAB for a free audiobook. Now let's get back to the conversation with Scott Milano of Tanj. Let's talk about tools and resources a little bit. Are there any that you personally frequent or like to have handy while you're doing naming, or anything in the office that everybody has access to?
Yeah, I think we all have kind of our own different tools and methods of just sort of gaining inspiration, diving deep into the different rabbit holes of concepts and language, whatever it may be. Of course, I think, I personally obviously do work with dictionaries. I have a handful that I regularly use, and then I like to kind of step out of it and try new things. And the internet is a magical place. There are an infinite number of, kind of resources on that front. When it's more like topic specific, like if you're working in something very technical or even lifestyle driven, whatever it may be, it's always good to dive deep into articles, books, all types of content that's out there, to kind of get away from the language itself or words themselves. One thing that I do is I do like to look at imagery that's kind of related to the topic that we're naming to, or the brand that we're naming to, or something that's very far removed, but might provide some inspiration in terms of metaphors or moods.
For imagery, are you just going to Google Images generally, or is there something else that you do to get visual inspiration?
There's a bit of that. Stock photo sites are pretty good. Getty Images is one of them. You just kind of type in, you could start with general keywords, and then that might inspire a little bit. And then you kind of make a couple of leaps from there, and you usually can end up in a cool place. I like how it just kind of lets me forget the words themselves and just kind of float conceptually and find new territories.
Great. Are there any other websites that you have bookmarked for naming projects that you can share?
One that I have used for a fair amount of time now is Sketch Engine. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am.
That one's kind of interesting. It just, again, opens up like all sorts of all sorts of words, right? All sorts of concepts that are either directly related, ancillary, or even, very far removed. There is this cool site. It's pretty old school looking. It's from, I think it's from the University of Western Australia, like a psycholinguistic database, which sounds a little scary, but it just, you can get in there and kind of like search for very specific parameters around number of letters, syllables, concreteness, imagery. It's not a silver bullet per se, but it has helps, just generate more ideas and kind of get out of a couple jams here and there.
Cool. Speaking of jams, when you do find either personally or as a team that you're kind of hitting a brick wall on a project, if that does happen, are there any special tips or tricks that you've used to get past that writer's block?
Yeah, I think just overall in terms of like writer's block, we're all professionals, right? We're all either professional writers, marketers, and certainly namers. I don't think that's like a major issue. I think we all welcome the blank page and just being able to dive into it. And especially if you're doing your homework right up front and you really know what you're talking about, ideas should flow. And then there's the question of like where you really hit a wall after you've developed 4,000 names for whatever project it is. And, the client might need to just see a little bit more. That's when you have to get creative. And I think, some of the best things that you could do is just forget about it for a little bit of time. Even if it's a couple hours or a day or so, just do not think about it and try to come back to it with fresh eyes. Maybe reposition, rejigger some of the, sort of strategic foundations that you've had. One trick that, we've done in the past when we really needed to is just kind of think of the product or the brand as something entirely different from what it actually is. If it's a piece of technology, think of it as some soda or some type of beverage or something, and just use, kind of lateral thinking to step outside of where you've been, right, to drive forward with where you need to go.
Are there any mistakes that you see clients making maybe when they're trying to do this on their own, or any pitfalls for namers to avoid, maybe if they're new to naming and they're junior namers?
With clients, it's interesting. I feel like it's going to sound weird, but they tend to come to us because they've made mistakes in the past with their naming. Like they don't get strategic about it, and they're just sort of trying to throw some names up on the wall and call it a day. They're not able to get deep enough creatively to unlock fresh new ideas that are actually cool. They don't understand sort of the linguistic or the legal hurdles that they'll be facing soon enough once they really try to take their name to market. And when they come to us, they in those instances, if they don't already know those challenges, they become aware of them pretty quickly.
Right.
For namers, it's tough. I mean, we've seen people who are pretty new who get it and can just thrive with whatever situation it is that we put in front of them. And then other folks could potentially struggle in certain areas. I think it's just like, kind of common pitfalls for junior namers are just like, not being able to go deep enough is like sort of plucking the low hanging fruit, right. Let's call it maestro or something like that and be done with it. The other side is like just maybe not being able to fully grasp and internalize the brief, like really understand what it means and its impact on the client's business and the client's brand. So just a couple points that we've seen throughout the years.
Well, maestro is a great segue to one of my last two questions. So I have a couple of fun ones that I like to ask, or I think they're fun anyway. Are there any specific name ideas that you've seen a million times and you're just tired of, or you kind of chuckle every time you see it on a list?
As a naming guru, such as you are, you probably know what the classic sort of that is. You've got your references to Greek gods. You've got your icons, your maestros, your catalyst type ideas. Hey, let's call it Premiere, stuff like that. Sometimes you just need to plow through that stuff to get to the good ideas. I totally understand that, but it's always tough to kind of have to deal with that in a list. And then in terms of trends, I mean, there's the conventional like .ly, you're adding Zen into it, like these sort of .com or semi-recent .com trends, whatever. It's obvious that stuff's not going to be timeless. I think what we really strive for, and I think probably all of us do, is just like making sure that the names that we're developing for our clients will really work for the long term. They're not overtly rooted in any kind of passing trend, whatever it may be. But yeah, I think on our side, we really strive to just make sure that they're as timeless as they can be. And then last question, what's your favorite thing about being a namer and coming up with name ideas? That's I think, do I have to pick one, or can I mean, I've created a business and devoted my current life to it. So, one of the reasons I feel like it's the right fit for me is there's this idea that it's essential for any business to go to market. If you don't have a name, you don't have a business. So we're helping people and businesses take flight, and being able to do that right at their inception or so early on and having such a big impact is cool. It's great to see your name or a name that your team has developed out there, and it just feels great. I think the other side is just like the community of namers, and we're kind of an odd breed, I guess. And I just love the fact that I'm able to work with such fun, smart, and talented people who love words as much as I do. Great. Well, I'm glad you're one of the members of this. I think you called it an odd breed, and I'm happy to be part of that small community with you. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and joining me today on the call. Thanks so much, Rob. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you like what you heard, please subscribe at iTunes and leave a rating and a review. I'd love to hear what you think. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. And visit howbrandsarebuilt.com to check out show notes, transcripts, articles, blog posts. You can sign up for the newsletter, or you can contact me with any questions or suggestions. To learn more about Scott and Tanj, visit their website. Again, it's tanj.co. They have some great content, case studies, and those 2 big naming guides that I mentioned. I'm talking 200 pages of content total. Definitely check those out. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks again.